We do it live.
All the time.
Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, you can send questions and comments to the Facebook live stream, so good evening and hello to all of you watching live, or those of you joining later. And you can also watch us live on YouTube, so hello and good evening to those on YouTube, and we look forward to chatting with you on there. You know me, my name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia, and we have a full house tonight, so we'll go straight to Mike the intern. Good evening.
Good evening, Mike Hambrick here, Junior Warden, Lakeshore Lodge in Madison, Ohio. Good evening.
And Jason Richards, good evening.
Hey, good evening. Jason Richards, Acacia Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, and Colonial Lodge number 1821 in Washington, D.C.
Robert Johnson, hello.
Hello, Robert Johnson, Space Novum 1183 in Illinois.
And Juan Sepulveda, good evening.
Good evening, Juan Sepulveda from Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in sunny Kissimmee, Florida.
All right. So, as always, we want to give a special shout out to the sixth Beatle, or the sixth Knight of the Round Table, which is all of our patrons who've been supporting the show for over a year now. It's been fantastic to keep things going. We're getting upgrades all the time thanks to you. The show keeps getting better thanks to you. And so if you want to help support the show, head on over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable and keep Masonry and Masonic education going on for years to come. Tonight, the episode we're going to talk about is something that's been, I don't know if you've noticed, guys, but things have been getting a little bit more polarizing in 2020 than they ever have, probably in our lifetimes. We all thought that the last, when it's an election year, it's bad, but this one seems to be just a hair bit worse. And so we thought it was prudent and wise to take a Masonic approach and look at how rhetoric, how debate is going on in 2020, and what can we do as Freemasons to extol the virtues that we're supposed to have been taught in our lodge experience. And so specifically, Juan wanted to kind of highlight that we see a lot of this rhetoric, especially because we are now behind the keyboards more often than we are out in the public. You'll see a lot more discussions online starting to get a little bit heated. And so, Juan, tell me a little bit more about what that experience is like.
Thank you, John. If you have spent any time at responding to the global pandemic, you've spent some time behind a keyboard and you have seen the increase in vitriol, the increase in argument. And I wanted, when we were discussing the possibility of touching this topic, we had you in mind. We had our brothers in mind. If you came to Masonry, you were recognized to be a good man who wanted to become better. Now, that implies that you are a good yet imperfect man like all of us. And part of that imperfection comes with the room we have for improvement and the room we have for growth and the increment in knowledge that we can have. Fortunately, Freemasonry provides for some of these and most of these gaps, especially when it comes to the Trivium. As Masons in today's society, we are the stewards of the Trivium, and our public education, even private institutions, have neglected logic, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And ideally, tonight we're able to share some tools with you, some tips with you, and some observations that may help you take these into heart, because it's not just your future that is at stake. It's the future of Masonry, it's the future of the United States of America, it's the future of civilized society. No pressure, but we're counting on you, brothers.
Yeah, now, Mike, I saw you hold up a book there for a second. What you got?
the Trivium, and it's from the Little Wooden Books group. They actually publish a series of books that separate titles that they combined into one, having to do with the Trivium, the classic liberal arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And they even include ethics in their logic discussion here in this book. So,
which is a great foundation when we talk about rhetoric and specifically debate as it applies to the things that are going on in the world. Jason, RJ, any other thoughts for setting up the topic of tonight's show?
Well, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, John. As a nation, as a world, it seems like we're getting increasingly polarized, and that might not actually be the case. It might just be that it's much easier to express our polarized sentiments with the advent of the internet and social media. But either way, if you log on to social media today, it's a veritable crapshoot of barbs and stingers just being thrown left and right. You even see that you see that most especially in Masonic groups today. Especially on Facebook. And so it's really, really important to talk a little bit about how you engage in discourse and conversations without devolving into ad hominem attacks and just kind of closing yourself off in your own echo chamber.
Yeah, so that brings up a good point. Robert, why do you think that especially the Masonic groups get so heated so quickly, right? It seems kind of counterintuitive. Why do you think that is?
I think arguably you have men who are generally pretty well informed, but the issue that's happening is media. I'm not blaming the media. I think I love the news. But what I will say is that it is becoming more and more increasingly difficult to find objective news sources. And the idea, what happens is we have a lot of guys who read, and they're reading one-sided arguments, and they're self-identifying with the arguments that are there. Well, I can't say that it doesn't matter if they're positive or negative arguments, because those arguments are positive or negative depending on the person, right? So it doesn't matter. But the point is that we're not reading outside, so it's a lot of echo chamber stuff. It's reinforcing of values, and we're sharing, and we're expounding, or we're expelling a lot of these arguments in these groups, and we're meeting other people who are reading other news sources, and it's just it's not a conducive atmosphere, because I love healthy debate. I love it, but we're just not seeing the level of a proper decorum in having a proper debate. And also, I think too, just an element that is taking away from it right now that may perhaps be feeding into it is when you have a debate in a Masonic lodge, usually the worshipful master is the interlocutor for the lodge or whatever. You're going through, and it's a structured type of speaking thing. And you're reminded that you're in this temple, and you shouldn't be a ding dong in there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of guys who want to talk. We're missing people. So so many factors are just going into this, and it's frustrating for everybody, man.
It's interesting. So what you're bringing up is the concept of confirmation bias, right? We'll only read the news articles that we tend to feel is right, and we'll start to build that echo chamber and really start to ignore alternate sources, alternate viewpoints. We just want to double down on our efforts. And so what's interesting, I went back and I thought, I know we did an episode on logical fallacies, and so this is episode 302, 302nd episode, and yet all the way back in, I episode 36. 036 is when we actually did our logical fallacies episode. So if you haven't heard that
So
one, one of my favorites.
it's time for a reminder
It's
for
time
everybody.
for a reminder,
right?
because we'll
Yeah.
talk about that. Yeah. So let's pull the thread on that then, because we're seeing a lot of those same things we said, I don't know, 3 years ago not to do. We're seeing it all over again. Jason, say more about ad hominem. What is an ad hominem fallacy?
So an ad hominem fallacy is a personal attack. It's toward the person or toward the body, and so it's essentially when when someone is arguing with another person, and the other person is like, "Well, you're just a
You're an
dickhead."
idiot, and I'm right.
Yeah, and it doesn't. It becomes a very personal argument at that point in time, and the uh, the fact of the matter is the argument's truth or validity doesn't hinge upon the character of the person kind of espousing that particular argument.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, because once you separate the person saying it from the fact being said, you can get a completely different worldview. So, for example, I'm not a Nazi, but there may be some things that Hitler have said in his life that are actually true. Okay? So that hurts people's heads just by those words coming out of your mouth. But it doesn't mean that the facts that were said were not true. It's that it was presented by an individual. And so if you can separate the individual from the fact being said, then the fact should be able to stand on its own regard. One way you see this is kind of interesting when you see some people in the media that will like go do like these man on the street interviews, and they'll say, "Hey, did you hear Obama said this?" And it was actually like the opponent that actually said it, but they're like, "Man, because Obama said it, that's stupid." We're like, "Well, if my guy said that, that would have been great." It really shows
There's
the
there's
fact
something
doesn't
to
stand on
that,
its own.
John.
Mm-hmm.
There's something to that, John. There was an article in Psychology Today that I was looking up in preparation for tonight's show. Actually, it was actually one of the things they talked about was just the opposite of what you're talking about. Whereas you're advocating something that may be true that somebody who was a hateful person had said. However, uh, they talked about humor and a cautionary note about humor. And what they did was they ran this experiment and they took random Jack Handy quotes. So anybody who out there, look up Jack Handy, and they
That's
decided to
awesome.
see what happened when you just kind of sent these quips from Jack Handy through email to see without context, were they funny? And like the way they came across it was like people rated themselves 2 times funnier than they thought, than actually the person got, and the context was almost never received, or they kind of didn't get it or whatever. But it was a cautionary tale about a similar thing, but in a vein of humor. So, yeah, who it is and the context matters.
So
Well,
Juan,
and
what else?
unfortunately,
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, unfortunately, we've very much built a cult of personality around whether it be leaders like Donald Trump, or pundits, or even Barack Obama. There's something that's comforting about idolizing a person and being able to overlook a multitude of faults. And you get into a little bit of the backfire effect, which we can talk about in a little bit later, where you start to rationalize and you start to do everything you can not to break that cult of personality around that person you've elevated up on a pedestal. And so I think that plays into it today as well.
And I don't know if this was intended to be a rhetorical tool, but you mentioned idolize, and it doesn't have to be idolize. It seems like you're using words improperly here. No, but here's my point. Whether you like Donald Trump or you don't, he has done some things that other presidents haven't. He had said some things that other people haven't, that people really value. Like there are things that he has done and he has said that are in complete line with what some of the people that voted for him expected of him. So they're satisfied with that side of the performance, and they may be willing to look away for the other parts that they don't find attractive. The problem comes when you enjoy one part of an individual, or you admire one part of an individual to a degree that now you are incapable of listening to any kind of criticism against them. And I'll give you a different. This is a little dated. It's maybe a year older, but when we had that whole Me Too movement, that whenever it really started trending in social media and in the news and everything like that, I guarantee you that many of the brothers that listen to us used to listen to Louis C.K. and loved his comedy, absolutely adored it. Now, you have to, in my opinion, you need to be able to compartmentalize to a certain degree and recognize that as a comedian, masterful. As a example for how to be a man, a respectable man when it comes to the opposite sex, absolutely inadequate. Now, you cannot allow then the fact that he may be a comedic genius to cloud your opinion about every single other department of his life, every single other aspect of his life, and close yourself to any kind of discussion.
Yeah, I see that. I see that a lot happening where it's like, well, this guy did this, so I'm never going to believe anything else he says ever again. Like, okay, that's a little closed-minded. I get where you're going. I can see the emotional response to that, which is, let's face it, that's what we're going to talk about a lot tonight, our emotional reactions to things. But that is true. You have to, I love the way you said it, compartmentalize, keep the man away from what's the statement, the comedy, the truths, right?
And a lot of times that reaction is accompanied by a level of hypocrisy or being disingenuous, because we all lie. All of us, every single one of us
No, I don't.
lies.
I disagree.
And there you go.
How's this dress make me look? Does it make my butt look big? Don't tell me you haven't said that you've ever said yes to that.
It's beautiful, dear.
No, it makes your face look big.
No, it's your fat that makes you look fat.
Right. You've actually answered that. I can, yeah,
Yeah, I wouldn't be still alive. That's a
You wouldn't
good
have
point.
5 kids.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, the hero worship that you were talking about, Jason, there's a name for that as far as the logical fallacy goes, and that's appeal to authority.
Yep.
And so let's just look at the COVID stuff that's been going on. We have Dr. Fauci, right? Well, he's a doctor. Got to do what he says. Like, he's a man. He's fallible, right? He can be wrong sometimes. In fact, there's already video of him contradicting. You don't need masks. Well, no, you would need to wear masks. So, but it's the emotional investment we have. Well, the guy with the lab coat has the authority, so I'm just, whatever he says, I'm going to follow.
And
Yeah,
there were a
like,
number of psychological experiments.
Oh, the Milgram experiment.
Yes.
Oh.
Like, well, these guys in the lab coats told me to press the button, so I pressed the button.
Very famous
I didn't realize,
experiment.
it was shocking somebody on the other end.
Yeah, one of my favorite, like, dark psychological experiments. This was done like in the 60s, right? They were trying to test how well people would follow an authority figure. And so they ran this test, this experiment. You had a person in one room, and they had like 10 switches in front of them. And the person in a lab coat and a clipboard and glasses, and just said, okay, Step 1, flip switch number 1. And as soon as they flip switch number 1, you could hear in the next room someone kind of grimace. Okay? Flip switch number 2. And then that grimace went a little bit louder. And they were going up the pain scale, and of this wasn't a real person, but it was a person acting as if they were getting an increased levels of pain as the switches were being flipped.
Where
And
can I sign up for this?
Yeah, right. That's in your own fantasy, Ham. And so what happened was they were testing to see how far would they go, and people were like, I don't really feel comfortable with this. And then the authority figure was like, nope, gotta run the experiment. Okay, flip switch number 8. And people would continue to do it. And it really, like, they had, some of these people had to have psychological, like, unbrainwashing as a result of this, because it shows how powerful we want to follow someone in a police uniform, in a lab coat, on a pedestal, in a nice suit, right? That we want to invest our thoughts in that, and that alone is why it's dangerous. That is that alone why we need to understand that it exists and step away from that. Just separate ourselves from it. Thank you for bringing that up, Jason. So what else have you guys seen online or in conversations of where things start to go awry when we're trying to have some good debate, where things just start to immediately diverge? Where do you see these, what starts out as a good conversation just start to go off the tracks?
There's been
Black or
some
white?
immense. What's that?
I completely talked over you. I was going to say black or white fallacy.
The black or white fallacy.
Yeah.
Say more about that.
We can come back
Yeah,
to that if you want to.
No, go for black that particular fallacy.
Go for it, Jason.
So, in a lot of cases, we've had a lot of conflict with revolving around race with the murder of George Floyd over the past several weeks in the United States, and a black or white fallacy is essentially just an all or nothing kind of deal. So either you support the police or you don't. Like, it's essentially two options, and you're saying that these are the only two options when really they're not the only two roads that you can take in an argument or a debate or a philosophy.
Yeah, largely what we see is the inability to look at, like what I was trying to talk about earlier, which was objective truth. That's the idea that by looking at what's happening, on both sides of, and whether that's you use the example of Mr. Floyd, so I'll say, you look at the tactics used there, and then you compare them to the evidence presented. And there's clear evidence that comes out later, right? I mean, but also there's this jumping to conclusions that I think a lot of people want to just rage on real fast, and they want to jump on a side and they want to get down to it, and we can't do it. I had our local sheriff, John Eidelberg, here in County, Illinois. Look him up. He was a great guy, and he said something to the effect of supporting a lot of what was happening in the forms of the protest, because he understands both sides of what happened, but also the objective kind of goal of saying justice, for him as a police officer, justice is done in the courtroom. And so this is what he was looking at. He wanted to see both sides and things. And when I read his message, I thought, it's a really good message for a lot of people to listen to, because it supports looking at both sides of an argument and not picking a side. You don't have to pick a side, because just because you don't like the police doesn't mean you support Antifa, or just because you don't like Antifa doesn't mean you're you're a blue bias, right? Like, you're all police or nothing. And that fallacy I see particularly, Jason, more than anything else right now. But I'm curious for you guys, if you guys notice the trolls, right? So there may be like a good intellectual conversation happening. And then there's like the landmine troll. He's not like the typical one who just drops something. He actually like goes in for the guise of adding something to the conversation, but instead just really wants to rip on somebody or some idea. And how you guys deal with that.
I mean, go ahead, Juan.
Here's where it's important that when we started talking at the beginning, that we are stewards of the Trivium. If you are able to go through the study of them in order, and you really spend energy trying to understand the how it works and how it's used, so understanding basically the philosophy of it, or the conceptual nature of it, and then its practical application today, what we are seeing now is the unraveling of the neglect that has permeated our nation. Uh, Rhetoric protects us from being easily manipulated. It allows us to understand, like, if you understand the toolbox of a rhetorician, and you understand the tactics that are utilized in order for a message to be conveyed or an idea to be implanted, then you can defend yourself from it. You can see, even when people do it inadvertently, or when they're doing it, they don't even know that they're doing it. At least you can protect yourself, and you are able to respond to it in an intelligent manner. Uh, and I'll single one specific tool of rhetoric: simile. You're trying to convey a message about, going back to the police. I saw a disgusting, I'm not even going to explain it, but it said, asking the police to do this is like this, and it compared it to something that it had no comparison whatsoever. It was completely erroneous. And the amount of shares that meme had, and the number of comments, people supporting it, to me was frightening, because it shows you the overwhelming majority of people that are engaging in this particular conversation have no clue what whomever that person crafted in that little grenade, basically. So this person spent 5 minutes tops generating a little meme that is completely invalid, puts it in the hands of people that are ill prepared to defend themselves from the tools of rhetoric, and they disseminate it. It becomes more contagious than the pandemic. It spreads in an exponential manner. And
isn't that what Russia did?
It is.
I mean, it's a great example, though, like, of using that technique, Juan, of putting, false information out there that's easily shareable, with hot headlines, with erroneous information taken out of context, and then you can, sway a public opinion.
Yeah.
I love the folks who caveat things with, I don't know if this is true, but I'm going to put it out there.
Yeah.
I'm always like, no, bad. If you don't know it's true, don't frickin' post it.
Because
you're just feeding the machine.
There's like the 3 rules, right, that Aristotle or Plato said or something. Is it true? Did you hear it firsthand? Something along those lines. We'll come back to it, I guess. I can't remember.
John's going to look it up.
Yeah, good. Yeah. But basically what it says is, this guy comes to a famous philosopher and he says, you're not going to believe what I just saw, or what I just, heard about so-and-so. And he says, "Well, is it true?" He says, "Well, I don't know. Do you got it?"
Yeah, I mean, there's different versions of it, but basically, is it true? Is it kind? And is it helpful? Right? And if
Mm-hmm.
you, and there's a couple other versions that spell out the acronym THINK, but basically, you start walking through that, and if it is true and it is kind, but it's not helpful, just still stop. Like, there's no reason to spread it, right? And
Yeah.
so it's a cascade of interrogations of the question that really should be all true, all satisfy all the conditions, so it'll pass. Mhm. And boy, man, if Facebook made you like do that before you shared anything, you had to answer all these questions. Is this really true?
I think it would be great.
Is it moral,
That's funny
ethical, or
though.
legal?
Right.
Yeah.
But no, the thing about people having discussions or debates, or if we want to take it one step further, arguments. The reality is this: if you want to be effective at it, you truly have to understand both sides. And sometimes the smartest thing for a person to do is argue the wrong side, what you consider the wrong side. I mean, the opposite of yourself. Because number one, you will learn so much more arguing from the other guy's perspective than you will sometimes from listening to their perspective. Uh, I, I could take this back to the high school debates. I mean, one of the members of my team when we had to do a debate on on the abortion issue. I won't cover the issue, but the fact is, she was a definite pro-life person, and she was put on a pro-choice debate side, and we won. I mean, and it was and you would think that somebody who was pro-life fighting pro-choice in that would not fight it as effectively because they don't want it to win, but no, she wanted to win, so she learned. Now that doesn't say she changed her mind. I'm not saying that at all. She just learned the one perspective and was able to argue it.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard it called like the reverse Turing test. If a Turing
Mm-hmm.
test is for you be able to figure out if a computer is human, it's like, can you explain the other side so well that they would believe that you are on their side?
Right.
Can you know all the nuances so well that if you were to have a conversation with them in the street, they'd be like, "Yep, he's definitely on my side." Um,
Yeah.
that is, it's hard, extremely hard to do. It is definitely worth doing, as you said, because for all the various reasons of really truly understanding the nuances. That reminds me of an F. Scott Fitzgerald quote that I really like, which says, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still be able to function."
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's true.
That you need to be able to understand and fully hold both of these thoughts and not be frozen and not, be overcome by one or the other. And
Right.
that
And
is
the other, and
certainly
the,
missing in the debates that we have.
yeah.
Mhm.
And the one thing that I think with that is that how can you truly understand your own side if you don't understand the other side either? Um,
Love it.
it doesn't matter what the argument is. If you can't understand the other side at all, are you truly understanding what it is you're fighting for?
Well,
So,
that's one of the things that I had to do a lot in grad school and undergrad when I was writing papers, especially relating to foreign policy. It's like you can argue for something, but at some point in time within the paper, you have to actually talk about the opposing arguments and the differences of opinions around your subject matter. It's not something you can just explain away or sweep under the rug. So it's taking a look at both sides is very much an academic exercise, and it makes you honestly it makes you that introspection makes you a better rhetorician, to say the least.
This was something that I've seen a lot about when we're talking about, in particular, because I'm not opening it up to this kind of a talk at all, but that's my disclaimer. But when we're talking about what's happening right now and the polarization of things, aside from politics, it's largely the talk about cultural bias and racism that's driving a lot of the talk online with many of the grandmasters of both Prince Hall and of quote unquote regular grand lodges around the United States and other places issuing these statements, of unity and against racism. But what we're seeing, though, is some of the best voices and intellectual men in our fraternity tackle the topics, and yet what they're trying to talk about is an idea of what you all were talking about, was looking in the mirror, right? So recognizing your own biases. So once you know your own biases, it's hard to imagine not being able to know how to look inside and see what those are. I don't know what it was like to not be able to do that because I can't remember. And maybe that's just because I'm a new person, like literally, we grow as people. But try to think back. I mean, I think all of us probably have, regardless of what the topic is, you've got some bias, whether it's, you don't like Italians or, whatever the case is. There's something there that you might, and maybe you're a great person and the thought, what do I do that really I don't like? And then it kind of starts to materialize and it instantly becomes uncomfortable. And you just can't, you don't even want to think about it anymore. You're on to the next thing. You don't want to think about the bad thing that you did one time when you were 16 or 12 or something, right? Like you just want to pretend it never happened. Just like you pretend that these thoughts don't happen, but everybody has these. And so what we see are these industry experts who are also Freemasons, who are also talking about these things. And yet in the comments and things, we still have people who say, no, that's not a thing. No. I mean, it's just instantaneous. I don't know, is it a thing? Nopeness? I don't know what to do. We have to be able to, even if we don't believe it, can we think about the possibility of its existence and use a hypothetical for yourself? If it does exist, how do I feel about it?
Well, I found a way that you can actually look at some of this on an almost childlike level. And I say that because I can remember as a kid growing up, a couple of different things. Racial jokes that, number one, I didn't get what I was saying, or even that the other kids were saying. But the piece that was funny was what occurred. So you laugh at it, but you don't, or even ethnic jokes, and I mean, and I just throw out ethnic because it depends on your area, what that joke became, and they were all the same, just change what ethnicity you were talking about in that different region of the country, even. And yet at the time, it didn't seem wrong to say, this ethnic guy did this and blah, blah, blah. And it gets funny, it didn't seem wrong. Now as an adult, I mean, and I can remember some adults going, man, you got to watch where you say those kind of jokes, because this guy or that guy is going to get upset. And you still don't get it. But as an adult looking back, I'm like, why didn't they just tell us that was all wrong to begin with? Not just watch where you say this, but this is wrong, because simply put, I mean, even in Canada, there's, different areas of the country there that they joke about different people over there, and I could rattle off the different ethnicities that have done, I've heard jokes for, but I don't want to do that to, upset anyone, but the point is every one of us has heard something, about a different ethnicity in a joke. And yet we thought it was innocent and it was fine. But it's the same thing in, when you look at that now as an adult, it's the same thing what you're doing with arguments, you're learning, you hear a certain perspective enough and it sounds innocent and innocent and innocent. And then eventually, all of a sudden, you're looking at it going, this was never innocent. So just,
You reminded me of another comedian that I listen to. He's very liberal with his. All right, for the conservative brothers listening, don't freak out. I said liberal, but I didn't mean like your enemy kind of liberal. I meant like he's free. Just relax now. All right, listen to what I gotta say. Uh, and
The
Andrew,
sphincters have loosened.
yeah, thank you for relaxing, brother. Just hear me out. Andrew Schultz is very liberal with his racial jokes, right? And I guarantee you that a bunch of the brothers that are listening to us listen to him and laugh, right? Now, it's a complicated topic, of course. I'm not going to say it's okay for you to make racial jokes or it's okay for you to laugh at them, but you find them funny. You know who you are. Now, one thing that this guy says that I find very interesting, he has a phrase where he says, judge me by my intention, not by your interpretation. And I think that's a very powerful thing to keep in the back of your mind. We have friends, we have family members that say things that are either politically incorrect, are racial in nature, and maybe they don't know. Maybe that's not the intention that they're trying to put in it. That's why it's important for us to be comfortable enough with engaging with people and trying to see, okay, what is your angle? Like, what did you mean by this? Or why do you use this word so often? Because we can't attribute always malice to what could be adequately explained by either ignorance or stupidity. So, but as Masons, it is our job to the people that we have access to, the people that upon whom we have an influence, whenever we encounter those things, for us to put in a word and say, hey, is this what you meant when you said that? Because that was weird.
Yeah.
And then try to steer them in the right direction.
Do you all have do you guys talk about politics and stuff around the dinner table with your families?
Sometimes.
Like with in-laws or whatever? So
Yeah.
Not anymore.
so this is
Not
really is
So
really
I will
healthy.
say I don't talk about it with my parents, but I will
Mhm.
talk about it with my wife and in-laws.
So I have to say, like, I am really lucky. My wife's aunt and uncle are fantastic people, and like they were just over for dinner tonight. And Uncle Mike is a war vet and like just one of these supreme intelligences that we all know in our, we all have that person in your family who's just like amazing. And he'll say something sometimes, and I kind of disagree with it, and then I'll talk about it, and then he'll tell me something, and then I'll tell him something, and then all of a sudden we're both like, how do we get out of this? This is crazy. Because and like all of a sudden we've met on this equal ground of like we both kind of don't know. I've said some things I don't like and that I do like, and he's done the same, but like we both agree that this is a good example of what that is. And it comes from, and I realized exactly what Juan was saying actually, which was the question aspect. Asking questions. Why do you believe that? What did the experts say about this? Uh, you know, Psychology Today had some of these questions in the article I was reading, and I was like, wow, this is so funny because this is exactly what Uncle Mike and I do. Is we ask questions about what we heard or whatever. Why do you think that view is that way? How wide is that view? And I think those are just so important, is to be able to ask those questions and formulate them in a way that isn't destructive to any bond of friendship that you might have. So you're asking respectful questions. There's a good brother, Brother Dave, that Brother Gary Meisner in the chat is always with us, but Brother Dave knows Gary, and they're friends. And Dave talked about this idea of talking with somebody and listening to their point of view and then like repeating it back to make sure you understood it before you start ripping it apart. And I think that's another key example.
That's steel manning, no?
Not straw manning, but steel manning, right?
There's a steel manning where you.
That's right. I'm Steel Manning. I listen. That's my superpower.
I wanted to add something before I forget about that dynamic of conversing with someone or arguing with someone. It could be online, it could be on the dining table. It doesn't have to end with a clear winner, and rarely will it ever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay for you to.
Do you often argue on top of the dining table?
Absolutely.
Okay. Making sure. No, please continue.
When I get very, very upset, I just exactly.
You do know the louder you get, the more likely you are to win, right?
That's what I hear. Let me offer some word choices for brothers who may not know when to shut their face off and recognize that there's not going to be a winner, right? You can say, you know what? You've given me a lot to think about. This was a good conversation. Done.
That's okay. You can stop right
That's
there.
Fine.
That is fine.
That's perfectly fine. You're not a loser for doing that.
Yeah,
but here's where you're wrong.
Yeah, that happens. It's going to happen. But that's the importance. In Mike talked about the debate club, and he talked about that kind of stuff. If you ever watch a good debate, a professional debate that's been recorded, and I think about Intelligence Square, for example. For those who haven't seen this, you're welcome. Go check it out and enjoy the heck out of it. There is a motion that is presented. Let's say religion poisons everything, right? That's a motion that I've heard argued very eloquently from both sides. And then you have someone for the motion or someone against the motion. These people studied to go into that argument. They prepared counter arguments for the likely rebuttals that they would face from the other opponents. These are people who really put a lot of energy to find sources that were reliable, that they wouldn't be embarrassed in quoting in the middle of the debate. And yet, at the end, it's very difficult for you to find that there's a clear-cut winner. Sometimes there is in this particular show, Intelligence Square, they measure based on the sway of opinions from the audience. So they poll the audience when they come in, they poll them on their way out, and then they can gauge how many, what was the percentage of change. But anyway, now, if these people who are arguing in front of an audience with their careers at stake sometimes are not fully prepared to have a clear win, you and I, when we hop on a stupid post on Facebook to have an argument, there's not a chance in hell that we are going to have all the resources, all the rebuttals or everything. There's a chance that there's room for us to change our opinion. Don't anchor yourself to your opinion and go in there and argue and make a fool out of yourself.
So the last
always start it with I feel like. Just do that. Makes everything okay.
And just make sure to end it with no true Mason.
I love that because that's one of the fallacies. That is the no true Scotsman fallacy. That no true Mason would believe this. Oh gosh, now you lost me. So to kind of wrap up the conversation, to kind of go where Juan was leading us, is that what can we do when we see this type of activity going on? If we're supposed to be keepers of the Trivium and the Quadrivium, if we're supposed to be taught and to internalize the advantages of having good debate, when we see either within ourselves or with others or especially with other Masons, what should we do, especially online, to help calm things down? What would you recommend?
My first thing would be is to say that we should learn to moderate the way, we need the way a moderator does in a true debate, not just go in there and go, hey guys, calm it down. I mean, literally go in and start redirecting the conversation in a legitimate debateful concept.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, there's a whole
um,
bunch of like facilitation techniques and all that to be able to, yeah, navigate that.
yeah,
That's a good point.
and that's kind of what I'm, suggesting there is facilitate it as a true moderator rather than, hey, you guys are getting out of hand, slow it down. I mean, that's, it's a lot of work to do it the other way, so we kind of have to do it sometimes that way. But if we're really trying to steer an argument and make it productive, that's what I think needs to be done, is some facilitation.
And it's one of those things where you almost have to, when you're doing that facilitation, to de-escalate a conflict, you have to throw your personal feelings and your personal sentiments about the argument to the wayside, because at that point in time you are there to de-escalate and re-wicker the situation, not to perhaps add more fuel onto the fire. And that for
There,
me is really hard. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Juan.
Yeah,
one thing I'll add
go
to
ahead.
this is that I noticed a couple people have picked it up. I'm a huge, huge fan of Socratic questioning, right? Where you actually are trying to diverge and not get to a solution. You're not trying to get people to your side. You're not trying to get people to be right or wrong. It's actually exploratory. You ask exploratory questions. What makes you say that? What else have you seen? Why do you think that is? And you really encourage conversation, not debate. You encourage ideas, not arguments. And if again, it's part of a facilitation technique, but if you just kind of hop on the old Google and look up Socratic questioning, um, you'll find you'll learn a lot more, because as some other people said in the chats, um, maybe the first problem is, why do people believe what they believe, right?
Mhm.
If someone says, I think that all past masters should be expelled, okay, why do you think that is true? Right? Just before I start arguing with you, say more. Like, open that up a little bit. I want you to unpack that, because that's pretty dense. Like, take it apart. Why do you feel that's true? What other options are available? And start going through that Socratic line of questioning. And you may find they don't know, and it just comes from emotion, and that's okay. You're not there to like call them out on it, stump the chump. No, you're there really to learn. Approach every conversation to learn, not to win.
There's a quote attributed to J. Richard Clark that says, "Seek first to understand before being understood." And if you think about the fact that every single human being you come in contact with has something to teach you, you are cheating yourself out of learning something if you think you have the answer and that's all you do. Try to give people answers. Just go in there, like absorb, ask questions. That's a great way. Go in there if there's an argument, and this has happened to me now with the whole COVID pandemic. Like, I understand people's livelihoods have been destroyed by this, and mental illness is at an all-time high, and there's a lot of pain out there, right? So I understand the desire to go back out, and everybody goes back to work, everybody goes back to lodge, everybody goes and chugs along, right? They allow that deep desire and they allow that experience of suffering to inform and perhaps create this bias for thinking that it is fully okay to go out. I recently had a little bit of a back and forth with uh, some people on Facebook where they were claiming that this was not as much of a big deal as people were making it out to be, and I could tell that the person who was writing this was hurt. I could tell this person was struggling, but he was making some claims that were dangerous. And if anybody around us were to hear them and take them for a fact, whether it was because they attributed him knowledge or respect or whatever, so we proceeded to ask, here's where we found information that supports what we're saying. Could you please share some of the sources that you found that led you to that conclusion? We would hate to continue to move forward thinking we were right and then unnecessarily holding people back from their livelihoods, or holding people back from saying goodbye to a loved one on their deathbed, or things of that nature. And normally when conversations get to that point, you have two outcomes. Either the other person replies with a source that they found, whether it's reliable or not is a different story, but they'll actually engage and say, here's what I know and here's what I find. What's wrong with this? Or they exit. Either they don't want to engage in and just to be clear, the exit is not necessarily a sign of defeat. It doesn't mean that they don't know what it is. Maybe they don't want to engage in the conversation anymore. Maybe they can't find a source. But those are the two things that you find. Either they dig in and continue the argument, or they go out. And which is why it's important for us to remember the other person on the other side of that screen. It's a human being with problems, with suffering, with difficulty. And you are not a winner if you win the argument at the expense of that man's emotion. You know what I'm saying? It's like, if you feel fulfilled that, yeah, I showed him stupid, blah, blah, blah. No. Go in there and try to find out, where did you find this? Be kind. You don't want to be tarnishing and creating destruction all around you. We need to turn this boat around for sure.
Well, that's a great way to kind of end the conversation. We'll go around now for shameless plugs and final thoughts, and we'll start with Mike the intern for his final thoughts of the evening.
So, one of the things I was taking away from, Juan's last thing there is kind of teach by being a student. And I know that sounds a little contradictory, but I think at the same time you're learning, if you're doing it right, you're actually teaching someone your side, if you're doing it well and if you're not trying to beat them down. And that's where my, quick joke out there was that, the louder you get, the more right you are. Well, it was one of the things when I was growing up that when I would argue with my mom about something, it was the louder I got, she knew the more wrong I really was, and the more wrong I knew I was. And she was usually right about that. And, but no, seriously, I think that if you're trying to learn the other perspective while listening and then make your own arguments as well, you will not only learn from them, but they will learn from you if you do it fair and equitably. And I think that's what true rhetoric and discussion is about.
Thank you, Mike. Jason.
So, when it comes to engaging in arguments online, it's very easy to get lost in emotions. It's very easy for me to do that. So remember to take a second or two to just stop and think about things, maybe even breathe a little bit before engaging, and really try to settle with yourself what you want to get out of engaging. Because oftentimes, I engage because I want to win. I think the other sometimes I lack empathy with seeing arguments from another person's perspective, and so I constantly have to just stop myself and say, okay, am I reading too much into this? Should I just leave it alone entirely? And to be honest, a good 8 times out of 10, that's what I do. I just leave it alone and move on. But just make sure that you know what you're talking about, and again, don't go into a debate with the sole purpose of winning. It's much more of a nobler cause to try to learn something and see if there's anything to the other argument. Although I'll admit that that's a bit altruistic and doesn't often play out when emotions get heated, as they do in online arguments, especially with all of the craziness that's going on in the world this year and today. Um, so just take some time and take some time to relax, think about what you're going to say, and then write it all out, and then decide whether or not you're going to delete it or hit that enter key. And avoid logical fallacies, and just realize that because you're open-minded and trying to learn something and trying to help somebody see something a different way, it doesn't mean that they're going to share that mindset. And so I've gone into an argument with folks online where I actually very much agree with their worldview and their philosophy, but they shared a post or a meme that was just completely untrue and fallacious, and so I've had to go in or I've gone in and I've said, you know what, that's not true, and here's why. And they turned around and gaslit me and attacked me,
Oh,
to the point where I stepped back. I said, I've obviously offended you. It wasn't my intention. This person literally said, Jason, you're a smart person. You're supposed to know this. And at that point in time, I realized that there was no way to reason with this person. Again, I agreed with their worldview. It's just they were sharing something that was patently false, and it was a black or white logical fallacy. And so at that point in time, I realized there was no reason to engage further. And so I de-escalated and ended up unfollowing them entirely and just said, you know what, I'm good. I don't need this. So just realize that even if you have the best of intentions, you can still get attacked and you can still get beat up over stuff.
no, I'm glad you said that, because that was something I was going to dance around too. Is that sometimes it's okay to just say, once you realize that it's not going to be a winnable argument, you just take that step back,
de-escalate, and move on.
You're like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Have a good day. Like that's the end of the conversation. Good point.
Yeah.
All right. How about you, Robert?
Well, I'll just tell you, there have been numerous times that sitting in traffic, not going anywhere, and I get a little bing. Somebody tagged me in a post on Facebook. And it's a retort to something that I said or an argument or whatever. And I'm like instantly flamed. Triggered, right? And I'm just like, oh, and I want to type back such a response so bad. And, I'm like, oh, I can't type right now. Oh, I don't want to give them the benefit of the 25 minutes until I get to work. But I do. Yeah, I mean, usually by the time I get there, I'm cooled off. So number one, cool off. Like don't let things just rage you. Don't try to get, don't let things trigger you so that you, so that you're so caught up in, flipping them off or whatever the case is that you're missing the point entirely. Largely when people do that kind of thing, they've made themselves look like a fool too. So don't get pulled into it. Please also, if you're sometimes we're condescending. So maybe you notice a logical fallacy, and what do? You go to logical fallacy website, you grab the link for the logical fallacy somebody's using, you just drop it right there, boom, and you leave. That's a ding dong thing to do.
Robert, you just used the fallacy of the curse of knowledge, so I'm just going to link that so you know not to use that next time. All right.
And it doesn't help change anybody's perspective. It just makes you look like a ding dong.
That's right. Yeah,
I'm guilty. I've done it.
Yeah, we've all done this, right? I mean, I still do it. My favorite thing to do is drop those referee memes. The logical fallacy referee memes. I have a whole folder on my phone full of them. If you don't believe me, so don't do that. If you're going to argue online, do yourself a hot favor. You are instantly discredited the second you use an improper form of any word. There, whatever the case is. So download like Grammarly text keyboard or something. Yeah, right. Download a Grammarly text keyboard and turn that stuff on when you're about to write, a big diatribe or something. Like John said, ask questions that flush out the opinions and be ready to try to connect with those people on their points of view, see it from their point of view, and maybe see why they got there, right? Look at how they grew up or whatever the question, whatever it is. Consider this wild concept that maybe you're wrong and they're right. So don't automatically just assume your point of view is the winner, right? Like, listen, it's okay to say, tell me more. Let people teach you stuff. That's okay. And my last thing I just have to say is, don't put the burden of, that's another logical fallacy. Don't put the burden of proof on somebody else. And what I mean is, like, if you say something and I say that's not true, don't say prove it. Right? Because somebody who doesn't believe that is probably going to share something that says, this, or prove it, and then you try, and nothing's ever going to be good enough for that. So, and then maybe you just remember that rhetoric is an art of persuasion. It's not a violent win. It's not finish him, right? It's, hey, let me show you this, and take them away. That's what I can offer. So.
Thank you. Juan, what are your thoughts?
Well, one thing I don't think we mentioned, doesn't it feel great, like when you're having an argument and you are winning and you're right, and like you got all your sources in line and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be so good. Link, quote, here, actually screenshot of what you said a month ago. Boom, you become invincible. Let's not fool ourselves. It feels pretty damn good. That's why it's difficult to do. To restrain yourself, to refrain from doing it. That's why it's tough, because your brain is telling you, listen, it's you got him right there. All you got to do is just tell him this and show him this and show him the other. It feels good, but that's why it becomes difficult, because we choose to do the difficult things. So anyway, let's give a good example out there. Are we perfect? No. All of us, we're going to be ding-dongs every now and then. RJ is not going to make it to work one morning. He's going to stop at the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, and he's just going to fire a hot one at you. Boom. And I'm going to do the same. All of us. Right? But the thing is, like, we recognize that feels good for you to spar with someone and show them the truth. But we are called to rise higher than that. And as much as you can, prepare your mind, prepare your spirit, so that when you are out there, you can be a good example for Freemasons. You can be a good example of your family. You can be a good example of a U.S. Citizen. We have so many opportunities to impress people with the right choices we make. It's embarrassing and it's sad to see how often our brothers are engaging in some arguments in the Winding Stairs Freemasonry group. But there's nothing we can do. It's human nature. It's going to happen. But the more of us who pay attention to the Trivium and really take those lessons to heart and put them to practice in our life, the better chance we're going to give ourselves to really become that perfect ashlar we set out to be. 2 quick plugs. If you want to talk about engaging in difficult conversations without sacrificing courtesy, go to thegentleman'sbrotherhood.com. We have some articles there that will help you with some tips and tricks to engage in those difficult conversations. regardless of how difficult they are. You can have them without losing friends. And lastly, go to freemasonryart.com. If you didn't know, I'm an artist, a Masonic artist. I got some artwork that can help you. Oh, that beautiful shirt. I love that, John. John is wearing our famous seed of life, or I mean, flower of life, square and compass shirt. You can find it exclusively freemasonryart.com. Thank you, brothers.
Good stuff. Thank you as always, Juan. It wasn't planned that way, I swear. But I'll take cash. Okay, so over to me. Let's see. A couple thoughts on this. Framing is important. So, the first step of any 12-step program is admitting that you have a problem, right? And as soon as you know you're getting ready to get into an argument, you're like, okay, why am I doing this, right? There's that old XKCD cartoon of like, I can't go to bed now. Someone on the internet is wrong, But what it should be, if you can step back for half a second, I would love for everyone to kind of approach debate, conversation, intellectual curiosity with this concept of shoshin, right? The beginner's mind. It's a Japanese term. It comes from like a Buddhist mentality of approaching with the beginner's mind as if you don't know anything, that you're there to really learn. So it's basically what it's saying is that in the beginner's mind, there are many options. In the expert's mind, there are very few. And accept that you could be wrong. It's very liberating. I got to say, it's very liberating to start the conversation with, I'm probably wrong about this. Not I could be wrong, I probably am wrong. And build up from there. Here's what I know. Let me hear more about what you know, and let's learn together. Right? It reminds me a lot of the quote from, it's been attributed to Mark Twain, where he says, "Do not argue with a fool, because he will drag you down to his level and beat you with years of experience." and you have to be careful about that, right? You want to know when this is not a winning battle, right? You want to know when, okay, I know this is not the right person I need to be debating with. Because another quote that transitions into my thought is, every person you've ever met knows something that you don't. They may not be the expert on something in your career field, it may not be expert in something you've studied in college, but they know something. They know something. They have some world perspective that you don't have by the mere fact of their world experience. And so you have to respect that and at least understand that they could be looking at the coin from the other side. Right? Want to give a special shout out to our super chats and YouTube. Joe Martinez, hashtag learn how to argue, Jason. Do a better job at that. Nathan Tweedy, who says that no true Scotsman is the best fallacy of them all. Hashtag there can be only one. Where Joe also replied, Highlander is the best movie ever. So there you go. There's your movie choice of the week. And finally, we picked up a new term. I wish we had a ding dong counter, because there's so many times we referenced "don't be a ding dong," and so if you can count them up and add them into the chat, I'd love to see what the total count was. But that was it's a cute way of saying don't be a jerk. So with that, been very fascinating. Step back, get your emotions away, try to apply some of the logic, try to apply the trivium and quadrivium that we're meant to guard with, so that we can inform and enlighten every brother, every person who sees us as representatives of the craft. And with that, I want to thank you very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.
Wow.
Wow, hey.